Hello everyone, thanks for coming outside with me today. It's about that time again where we open up another can of worms. Ugh. All things considered, it's not that bad. It kind of has a reminiscent hue of a person throwing their keyboard through their computer screen. It's delicious. So I wanted to make this video earlier in the season, but then somebody had to go onto YouTube and decided to convince everybody to shoot a fixed blade broadhead. But I'm still here and I'm gonna make this video because I'm kind of at a point where I'm tired of people asking me about mechanical broadheads and which one should they shoot and which one's kind of the best option. And that's just kind of true of in the shop, but also of course via the YouTube channel and social media. It just doesn't make any sense to me anymore why people, with all the negative possible mathematical negative things that could happen with the mechanical broadhead, why you still choose it over the fixed blade because you can't get the fixed blade to fly with the field point. And yes, I don't know how to use air quotes correctly or whatever. It takes less than a half an hour pretty much these days to paper tune a modern compound bow, particularly if you're using a drop away rest. It makes life really simple. And if you're one of those people that can't get anything to tune, follow the links in the description below. I have a When Tuning Hits the Fan playlist down there of all the tuning videos that I've done to date and stuff that I'll add later on in the future about grip tuning and torque tuning, paper tuning, bear shaft tuning, knock indexing to tune that way, how to move your rest, whether you're shooting a drop away or a whisker biscuit. Follow that link in the description, watch those videos, and you should be able to get any broadhead to fly any way that you need. So I got 4 very popular broadheads right here, although one is not made anymore, and I'll still explain why I have it here in the lineup. This is a Magnus Black Hornet, the straight edge model. This is a Slick Trick Standard. This is a Rocket Steelhead, not made anymore, and an NAP Shockwave. So for years I was a Magnus Stinger shooter, an 85 and 100 grain, just the standard 2 or 4 blade model, and it did the trick for me just fine. Then in 2015 I decided to switch things up and go to a mechanical head, and that's when I shot the Rocket Steelhead, which was still being produced at the time, and the NAP Shockwave, and ultimately for me the NAP Shockwave won out and I ended up harvesting a couple deer with it. The problem why I went immediately back to fixed blades after just 1 year of shooting mechanicals was I was shooting the exact same arrow, which at the time was an Easton Axis, about 476 grains of total arrow weight, and with a standard Slick Trick or a standard Magnus broadhead, I was blowing through critters no problem from 0 to 35 yards. As soon as I switched over to mechanical, the 3 deer that I shot with it, I got 1 pass through and then 2 stuck on ribs on the opposite side and 1 stuck right into an opposite shoulder, didn't punch through or try to direct and find its way out. I only had 1 entrance wound and not an exit hole. As soon as I got that after that season, I didn't throw them in the trash. I still have them, but I immediately switched back to shoot Magnus and shooting a fixed blade just in general. Now, like I said earlier, the ability to tune today's compound bows drastically outweighs any advantage that you get with shooting a mechanical because they fly with your field points. Let's get that out of our heads right now. It's super easy to tune today's bows to get any arrow to fly perfectly as a bear shaft or with a field point with fletchings. It's super simple then to get even this super wide 1.25" with 7/8 bleeders Magnus Black Hornet. I get this to fly out of my wife's bow when it's even marginally tuned. I'll put that link to that video in the description below. It's super simple to get a fixed blade broadhead these days to fly exactly the way you need it. We don't need to be shooting a mechanical to still get that field point like accuracy. It's just not necessary. And the upsides of shooting a fixed blade versus shooting a mechanical broadhead are just so large that it's not even worth talking about. So let's actually dive into some of those things of why it's so important to pick a fixed blade over a mechanical, and particularly in just today's world. The biggest one actually has nothing to do with the build of either broadheads. It just has to deal with simple math. When you go into your kitchen and you want to cut a steak or a chicken or something like that, you're going to pull the knife out of the block and immediately start cutting with it. You don't pull a knife out of the block, push it into the meat, then a blade opens up, and then you start cutting. That just makes absolutely 0 sense. Plus, when you get a mechanical like that, if it's like an over-the-top mechanical or one that's not sharpened on the back side, if it pulls backwards, like if you were to pull your knife backwards to cut that steak, there is no cutting action. The back side of the blade is dull. I can sit here and run my hands all over both these mechanical broadheads on the back side and never once get cut. Can't do that with a fixed blade. This Slick Trick, even though it's not sharpened on the back side, the corners are still razor sharp, and this Magnus, which is my personal favorite, it's sharpened on all four sides. So whether it's going in or going out, it's razor sharp and it's cutting and doing what it's supposed to do 100% of the time, not just on entry, but also on exit. So it's always open and available, which also means that there's never a time when it is unavailable or when it will fail for being unavailable. So for example, one of the biggest problems people have with mechanical broadheads is not all of the blades opening or them not opening at all. Or even worse, a blade comes open in flight and then all of a sudden you're shooting a knuckleball of an arrow downrange. None of those sound like something that I want to take a chance at. Now, with today's mechanical broadheads, is it common? No, but I get emails weekly from people saying that I've switched to fixed blade because in the past, at some point, I've lost an animal or I've wounded an animal and not done a fatal shot because the arrow corkscrewed to the target because a rubber band broke or a blade became deployed from a collar system or something like that. You don't have that with a fixed blade. The same way you shot it yesterday is the same way you're going to shoot it today, and 10 years from now, it's not going to change. So the compactness of a mechanical broadhead is undeniable. It's so streamlined. It's so built like a field point, it's not even funny. And in particular, when you compare it to something like this Black Hornet, which is 1.25 inches wide, it's like an airplane wing on the front of this broadhead. But what a lot of people neglect is the actual length of the broadhead, which is something that I focus more on myself. If the arrow is tuned and your bow is tuned, you can get anything to fly any way that you would like it. But what I don't like is the length of the ferrule, because the longer something is, the easier it is to bend, the easier it is to flex. I don't want that. I want my broadhead to have a short, beefy ferrule, really thick blades that are really able to penetrate bone, not dull up as quickly, not bend or crack or a splinter or shave themselves off, completely lose their cutting edge, because they're built flimsy and in a long, elongated frame. I don't want that. So for example, this NAP Shockwave here has a pretty long ferrule. It's actually significantly longer than all the other broadheads. Now, on top of that, because it's so much longer, we have to shave off weight somewhere, right? So all the other ferrules are significantly thinner and they're significantly shorter and thicker in terms of the material that's on them. Because this ferrule is so long, there has to be a weight loss here somewhere, right? So you're either shaving off ferrule width and ferrule weight because you got to keep it between 100 and 125 grains, right? You don't see mechanicals much over that because they'd be just so large in how much material would actually have to be there. So the blades are thinner. They're right around the 0.35, right? Compared to like the Magnus, which is an 0.59, almost twice as thick in shorter of the ferrule. Now, granted, of course, the blade is open and cutting. It's like that airplane wing, but I would much rather have a thicker, beefier ferrule and a thicker, beefier blade over a longer, thinner, flimsier one. My blades aren't going to bend. They're not going to chip. They're not going to crack. The edge retention is so much better and so much more reliable. Now, you might be thinking, well, hold on there. That rocket steelhead's pretty daggum short, and it is, and it was by far my favorite mechanical broadhead to date because it's so short, it's so beefy, and it's so compact, right? The cutting is only about 1 inch to 1 1/16 inches. It's really not that big of a head. I really like it for what it's built for. I'm kind of sad that Rocket stopped making it. But my biggest problem with it is that it is so small, the blades are so small, and they are impossible to resharpen. First of all, when you get a mechanical broadhead, it's really hard to sharpen the blades unless you kind of run them through like one of those, those blade knife sharpeners, right? That have a handle to them and you rake them over. They might have 2 cross sticks in them, but the angle might not be exactly what the broadhead is meant for, right? You might be cutting a different bevel into the blade. You don't want that. So with these really tiny, short Rocket steelhead blades, 1 1/16 cut, I could never sharpen them. And they were dull as a butter knife coming out of the package. And anybody will tell you that the old Rocket steelheads are way better than the newer ones, but even still, those blades were never all that sharp. I can take this slick trick, I can take this Magnus, I can take the blades out, put them in a jig like my Lansky or a Stay Sharp or a KME, and I can sharpen them up, no problem. They're meant to be resharpened right into a jig because the blades are actually big enough and thick enough to actually achieve that. When you're talking 0.35 or 0.30 with the case of this Rocket steelhead, there's not a whole lot of meat there on the blade itself to resharpen, and I just don't want that in a head. And why would you want that in a head? I would rather have a knife that's a lot stiffer and a lot thicker and a lot easier to hold an edge in my kitchen, so why would I want to take something so thin and flimsy and something I can't resharpen into the woods? Now, in addition to those thicker, beefier parts, also I'm getting fewer numbers of parts, right? And this is something that I always look for in something that's simple and easy, right? So with a fixed blade broadhead, you can go with a one-piece milled single bevel all the way up to something like this Magnus, which has about 5 or 6 parts, depending if you want to include the one screw that holds in the main blade. So you have the screw, the ferrule, the retaining block, the bleeder blade, and the main blade. So you got 5 parts there. Slick trick, same thing. You got the ferrule, 2 blades, and a little retainer ring. It screws right into the insert of the arrow. So you have 4 parts there. This NAP Shockwave here has 3 blades, 3 screws, 1 for each blade, and then a 2-piece ferrule. You have 8 pieces that can go wrong on this broadhead compared to if you have a single bevel 1, or if you have something like this Magnus, which has 5 or 6, depending on which model you shoot. For me, I'm gonna follow Murphy's Law. If something's going to break, a man-made mechanical thing is going to break, I wanna have fewer parts that are capable of breaking. I wanna have thicker, beefier parts that are not capable of breaking as easily as their thinner, weaker counterparts. So for me, the choice is obvious, and I think for you at home, the choice is getting more and more obvious as we go on. I don't think there's any excuse with today's bow and arrow technology to have to shoot a mechanical in order for it to fly like a field point. I'm tired of hearing it. It's absolutely ridiculous. Like I said, I'll put videos in the description below of me taking my wife's untuned bow. It's about 6 inches too short in draw length, about half the poundage I usually shoot, arrow that's definitely not tuned, and it's underspined for what it's actually shooting, and I'm able to get this huge 1.25" Magnus Black Hornet to fly like a dart out to 30 yards, and I'm only using blazers on the back end, shrink wrap blazers to boot. You just can't deny that fixed blades are just so much more reliable, whether you're shooting a light poundage, low draw like a kid or a lady, or all the way up to big guys like me who can draw 30, 31 inches and 60, 70 pounds. So that's all for this video, and if I ruffled your feathers and hurt your feelings and you want to tell me about it, follow the links in the description below, hit me up on Facebook and Instagram, leave me a nasty email, averagechecarchery@gmail.com, or of course, you can always comment for the world to see here on YouTube. Hope you're able to get outside, enjoy the sport of archery hunting if you so choose. Definitely enjoy God's beautiful creation, no matter how wet it is, and we'll get to see you next time.